It's the early morning of December the 12th in the year 627. A huge crowd of men walks through a semi-desertic landscape. Far away, on the horizon, they can see the legendary city of Nineveh, which once was home of the great king Ashurbanipal of Assyria. As they walk, the men produce loud and regular metallic sounds. It's an army. A huge army assembled by the glorious Byzantine Empire. Leading these troops, there's a man covered by a heavy armor and a long cape, who rides at slow pace on an elegant horse. Is the Emperor, Heraclius. He is looking forward, but his mind is somewhere else. He's thinking about how to obtain a decisive victory on this campaign. But to understand this story we have to start, as we should, from the beginning. When you hear about the Crusades, you imagine an army of medieval knights fighting at the gates of Jerusalem. And, if somebody asks when the First Crusade started, you would certainly say it started in the Middle Ages. Or more precisely, on the year 1096. Actually, the true First Crusade did not start in the 11th century, but 4 centuries earlier. It all began in the year 614, when the great Persian king Khosrow II sent his generals to conquer the sacred city of Jerusalem. On an apparently ordinary morning, the men guarding the gates of the city saw a big cloud of dust at the distance. The cloud was slowly moving closer and closer to Jerusalem. Soon enough, the guards discovered what was producing this huge amount of dust. An enormous Persian army was approaching. For the Persians, the siege and conquest of Jerusalem was just another step in the Persian-Byzantine War, which, at that time, had been going on for several years, with the Persians conquering city after city on Byzantine territory, due to the weakness and low morale of the Christian Empire's armies. But for the Byzantines, Jerusalem was not just another city. It was the most sacred city of all. The city where Christ had gone through his passion, death and resurrection. Other cities had negotiated with the Sassanids or surrendered with little to none fighting. But Jerusalem's Christian population was not ready to be subject to infidels. The Persians did conquer the sacred city. But as soon as the main army left Jerusalem, the population rose and slaughtered the few remaining troops. When the Persian general received the news about the revolt, he returned, enraged, with his whole army behind him. This time, the Persians not only took the city, but also carried out a horrible massacre within its Christian inhabitants and, not happy with that, they also took the Verum Crucis, or true cross, a sacred relic venerated all throughout the empire, because it was believed to be made of fragments of the cross of Christ. The whole empire was astonished by the actions of the Persians. The general feeling all throughout the empire was that the fate of Christendom hung in the balance. So now, all hierarchies, from the highest to the lowest, were bound to make one great effort to beat back the fire-worshipping Persians. and recover the holy places. The emperor at this moment was Heraclius, son of Carthage's exarch, who had taken the crown from Phocas, a man hated all throughout the empire, due to the many massacres committed under his reign and his ineffectiveness in stopping the advance of the Persians over Byzantine domains. Phocas had been the Eastern Roman emperor for 8 years, until, on the morning of October 4, 610, he was awakened by the big roar of many servants and soldiers, running through the palace. Then one of his generals delivered the bad news. A huge fleet of warships was approaching the shores of Constantinople. The commanding ship waved an enormous flag with an image of the Virgin Mary. The message was clear: the era of darkness under Emperor Phocas was coming to an end. Heraclius, son of Carthage's exarch, also named Heraclius, commanded this fleet, and before the day had ended, he had destroyed the tyrant's fleet and entered the empire's capital city with almost no resistance. Abandoned by his troops, Phocas was quickly captured and presented to Heraclius. "So, is this the way you have governed the empire?" said Heraclius. "Will you govern it any better?" said Phocas. Enraged, Heraclius killed him with his own sword. In just one day, Heraclius had put an end to Phocas' reign of terror. Next day the Patriarch and the Senate hailed Heraclius as emperor, and he was duly crowned in St. Sophia on October 5, AD 610. Impossible to ask for a more epic entry into history. Since then, however, Heraclius had not had any other important victory on the military field. In fact, for the first 12 years of his reign he was only able to defend the frontiers of Thrace and Asia Minor. Farther from that, the empire continued losing territory due to the Persian conquests. But now, the emperor knew it was time to write a new heroic chapter in his life. Backed by the treasury of church and the faith of all Byzantine Christianity, he was able to assemble a big and powerful army, and with them he started the holy war against the Sassanids. The first crusade in history had begun. This campaign was long and difficult, with victories and losers for each of the empires involved. The Byzantines, however, had an important factor on their side: the epic figure of Emperor Heraclius. During the whole war, he inspired the troops, fighting with great courage at the front, what cost him being wounded in more than one occasion. In one of these battles, the Byzantines were fighting to get control of a bridge over the Seiros River. Seeing that his troops were about to collapse, he stood to fight on the bridge, facing and killing several enemies. Then, a gigantic Persian champion ran directly to him with his sword held high. Heraclius confronted him without hesitation. On each discharge of the Persian, the emperor's legs would tremble, but he stood his ground until he was able to return the attack. A mix of rage, fear and desperation drove Heraclius forward, until the Persian legs also started to tremble. Then, with a quick move, he speared his blade into the Persian's throat. Heraclius pushed the dead Persian's body into the river, and his troops reached the ecstasy of battle, resuming the fight with wild enthusiasm. The decisive battle of the campaign was fought on December 12, 627, on the plains near the legendary city of Nineveh. Here, our story goes back to the beginning. On that day, after a skirmish with Persian scouts, Heraclius realized that he needed a more advantageous terrain to face the enemy, so he began a strategic withdrawal. His army was being closely followed by the Sassanids. Then, a thick fog began to cover the plains. The emperor was thinking about the whole campaign and on how this all will end. The fog was becoming thicker and thicker around them. Suddenly, Heraclius was pulled out of his thoughts by one of his generals. The visibility was so poor, he said, that some men had been falling down and hurting themselves with their own swords and spears. Heraclius then ordered the army to immediately halt its advance. At that very moment, he realized that he could use this circumstance to his advantage. Heraclius ordered his men to quickly form a long and tight line of battle, with all shields in the front. When the fog finally dissipated, the sun was already rising high on the horizon. So when the Persian army approached the Byzantines, they were struck by the powerful light of the sun, reflected on thousands of Byzantine shields. The Persians were blinded for a moment, and confusion spread through all their ranks. Then, Heraclius at the head of the Byzantine cavalry, charged against the Sassanids, spreading terror and death among them. In the midst of battle, the Persian general, Khosrow, saw a dark figure coming directly to him like a thunder, riding on a black horse that was spitting foam from his mouth. In Khosrow's mind, that was Ashma, the Zoroastrian demon of wrath and fury, coming to end his life. The last thing he saw was a big and shiny spear coming directly to his chest. Khosrow fell to the ground, his last breath gone. Then Heraclius drew his sword and held it high. His men expelled a horrific shout of fury, and threw themselves with yet more fanaticism to battle. The Byzantine army, once again inspired by their emperor, would reach the ultimate victory against the Persians on that battle. After this battle, Khosrow was unable to assemble a new army. Heraclius and his men, facing little to none resistance, continued their advance through Persian dominions, looting all the great palaces found on their way. The Persian emperor did not survive the winter. His prestige was destroyed and soon the conspiracies revolved around him. One of them, headed by his son, triumphed and led Khosrow to his death. The new Persian sovereign, Khosrow II, offered Heraclius peace and thus, the war ended. Heraclius returned to Constantinople in the year 628. With his spoils, his victorious army, and his great trophy, the True Cross. His entry was celebrated in the style of an old Roman triumph. All the citizens came out to greet the army, and the ceremony concluded with the exhibition of the True Cross before the high altar of Saint Sophia. So, this has been the story of Emperor Heraclius and the true First Crusade. If you liked it, please hit the like button and follow us so you can discover more of these interesting stories. Soon, we will return with more history and mythology themes.